Welcome back to my channel, and thank you so very much for tuning in for our 8th episode of this series. I just honestly cannot believe that we are already 8 episodes into this series, you guys. It's literally crazy, but just jumping into this case, this episode is going to be just a little different because we are going to be talking about a young man that lost his life senselessly to gun violence instead of talking about the usual case of a young lady. And if you are from the Chicago area, or if you follow rap really closely, I'm sure that you have heard of this story, and that is the tragic case of Leonard Anderson, famously known by his artist name LA Capone. We play for keeps. The whole hood know me. Leonard Anderson was born on Wednesday, September 18th, 1996. He was born in the South Side area of Chicago. Now, his parents split when he was very, very young, and I'm sure as a young child that's very, very hard, especially as a young boy. But La did grow up amongst his mother and his 4 sisters. Being the only boy in the family, I'm sure La did have the responsibility of being very protective of his sisters, and I'm sure he was very protective over his sisters and vice versa. From a young age, his mother expressed that they both knew that he was destined for greater things. The area that La grew up in wasn't so friendly, and his mother did not want him to grow up in that kind of environment. She truly did not want that lifestyle for her child. So in middle school, his mother had actually went to send him to live with his father. His father at the time did live in Atlanta, so that is where he lived for a while. And I believe the reasoning that his mother had for wanting him to leave was definitely fair. Before fame, he was already that guy. LA was known already by a lot of famous artists, and he frequented with them as well. While attending school in Atlanta, he actually met the rapper Lil Yachty, and Lil Yachty and his brother had actually maintained a relationship afterwards. LA did end up moving back to his mother's home, and this was because his father had actually sadly passed away. There is no exact date on when this happened or the cause of death, but we do know that he did end up moving back to Chicago with his 4 sisters and his mother. And already it was just so much stressors that this young man had been going through and just enduring at such a young age. But nevertheless, LA was an honors student, and he also played on the football team at his school. I also forgot to mention that upon him being friends with Lil Yachty, up-and-coming rapper at the time, Lil Durk, and many others, he had also ran in groups with the OMG girls, so he was really, really well known amongst a lot of famous people around that time. When LA had moved back to Chicago with his mother, this is where things had actually changed for him, and not for the better. He had been getting to the very exact same thing his mother did not want him to get into, that his mother was trying so hard to just steer him from. And not saying that this is an excuse, but I'm sure that losing his father was a very big stressor for him, especially him being a young boy, and I'm sure that played a major part in what happened. Now, as I stated before, he had to return back to Chicago due to the loss of his father, and at that time there was a lot of violent things going on in Chicago. I mean, they earned the name Chirac because of all the violence that had been going down. It was kind of like a wordplay on Iraq and things that was going on over there. This was the time that Chief Keef was coming up, Lil Durk was coming up, just people like that. So just to paint a picture of, you know, the kind of things that was going on and the kind of things that was surrounding. Although LA was heavily involved in school, and he was, you know, involved in sports, specifically football, he also began to hang around with the dudes from his neighborhood. And around this time, he had also became affiliated with gangs. At this time, LA was beginning to carry pew-pews, you know, and he also was getting into issues at school. These dudes were also involved in, you know, rapping and just trying to also take their talents to the next level, although they were still involved in street activity, which is kind of like, you know, this is what we see a lot of the times, not to just derail from the story, but we see this a lot of times with young kids. They're so talented, but you know, they get tied up in street situations, and it's just really, really tragic to see. But the other dudes in the neighborhood that he had been hanging out with, they were rapping, and this kind of sort of piqued his interest more in rapping, because LA, he always was a rapper. He always had interest in music and, you know, just being an artist. And him being book smart helped that a lot, because it helped him make better raps. He first began appearing in videos with rappers like Lil Rondo number 9, and much others. And a lot of these rappers were from a group called 600. Now, eventually, LA did venture off, and he did go ahead and drop music of his own. And keep in mind, he was only 14, you guys. He was only 14, dropping hits, and the rest is basically history with his music. The alias name LA Capone came from, people said, a play on his initials, which was Leonard Anderson, so LA, and then the Capone part came from the famous Chicago gangster Al Capone. Rapping very early on in his career, starting at only 14 years old, everyone around LA knew that he was going to blow up and be something big. He was very well liked in his neighborhood and amongst his group of friends. And the first ever song that he had been featured on had actually been called Grimy, and this song was featured with artists Rondo number 9 and King Bruce. And his friend Rondo had already established a name for himself in the music industry, coming out with, you know, a couple of tracks. But when LA did hit the scene, it was clear that he was gonna blow up fast. At the time, the pair had been rapping together, and it was said that they would blow up together, and they were on the verge of being very, very popular, especially amongst their neighborhood. A lot of people like their music because they can relate. They felt as if LA definitely spoke exactly what he lived, and that lifestyle obviously had a lot of cons to it. And in September of 2012, LA had actually been shot. He did survive this attack, and I obviously was not there, but from the accounts of the people that were there, this is what happened. It's been said that LA and his friends had been on the block just chilling, hanging out amongst each other, and they decided to walk from one block to another. The block that they decided to walk from was 600 block to Front Street. And if you are from Chicago and I'm not saying it correctly, definitely correct me down in the comment section below, because I do not want to put out misinformation. Now, this is Chicago, and at this time, Chicago had gained the nickname Chirac, and I'm sure you know what was going on around that time. It was very violent, vicious, and yeah. So the group did have protection on them. They had pew-pews, and they actually decided to leave it behind when they were walking because they said that the block was too hot. Now, that means that police activity could have been very, very heavily where they was frequent, and they did not want to get into trouble for having it, and then they get it taken away, and that's what I gathered from that. But they had been walking, and some people that they had issues with was also in their presence, and at first they didn't notice them. They weren't really paying attention at the time, just talking amongst themselves. And the person that they actually had issues with went into a store and shot someone prior to shooting LA. Now, the group heard the shots, and they didn't know where the shots came from at the time. That will change shortly after, when the shooter came out and made his presence known to LA and his group of friends. So he showed his gun to the boys, and he actually ended up shooting at the boys, and obviously the boys ended up running in different directions, running away from the gun, and he sadly ended up getting hit. Now, LA ended up running down the street. obviously away from his friends, and he ended up ducking behind a car. This resulted in him getting shot in his leg. Now, with this incident, LA had actually survived and he made a recovery. And I'm sure, you know, not a full recovery, but overall recovered. And when I say not fully recovered, I'm not talking about physically, which, yeah, there's sometimes incurable damages, but that's not what I mean. I'm talking about mentally. Like, I'm sure this put LA in a more alert mode than he already was in. These boys, the area that they grow up in, whether it's Chicago, New York City, at different places, overall, when these boys are in these situations, they are already, you know, going through certain PTSD. They're going through, you know, they have to be more alert, more observant. And I'm sure this really put LA in more of an alert mode. He was more observant. He was probably more paranoid, you know. So that's what I mean by haven't fully recovered. When LA got shot, he was not fazed at all. These boys had been exposed to so much at such a young age. This had been becoming very normal for them. Nevertheless, LA made a speedy recovery and was back to his music. Now, he went on to go ahead and drop his first solo track called Work, and the song actually went up and did good numbers, especially for a debut song. But the song of his that really took off was the song Murder. He dropped this track in 2013, which was followed by another called Loud. Now, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Chicago birthed legends. They birthed a lot of people that made a lot of good music. It was just the things that was going on around that time, and sadly it claimed a lot of these artists' lives. Now, when he had went and dropped the track Loud, this one had gained a lot of traction, and it also shows LA's versatility at that time. He went on to graduate high school in 2013, and he was also an honor student, and LA was getting really good grades in school. He had actually decided to hold off on going to college, which most people do after they graduate, and soon after he decided to just pursue his rap career heavily. In July, the year of 2013, LA had actually made an appearance in his friend's mixtape, and this mixtape was called Several Stripes. And many of the songs that had dropped from this mixtape had became Chicago classics. And he had actually went on to drop a video for the song Play for Keeps, and that actually gained millions of views and traction. LA had been on his way to becoming a major name in the industry. He had been receiving a lot of love from mainstream artists like T.I., French Montana, and even Waka Flocka. Once LA had saw the traction that he had been receiving from the video Play for Keeps, he knew that this had to be the moment he had to lock in. Now, at this time, an official project from him had not been dropped, so he actually began to lock things down and start to book studio time. His goal was to go ahead, get in the studio, complete his project, and then put it out there for his fans. But sadly, that did not get to happen. Before even having the chance to release, LA had been tragically killed shortly after leaving the studio. Now, that night, the events had been said to have gone like this. On September 26, 2013, around 6:30 that evening, LA had actually left out the studio on the 7000 block of South Stony Island Avenue. So it had been said that he had been walking down this alley so he can be able to get into a car, I believe the car of a friend, and he had actually been confronted by some rivals. The rivals had ended up opening fire, firing several shots. LA ended up getting hit in his thigh and his lower back. The homeboy JB Bin Laden that had been accompanying him at that time decided to leave out with him from the studio, and they decided to walk opposite directions to their home. So basically they split up, they're walking home, and as LA was walking away, the friend had actually seen the rivals attempting to sneak up on him, and he tried to warn him, but it had been far too late at that time. LA attempted to run away and ended up collapsing shortly after, and he was rushed to the hospital. Now, upon arriving to the hospital, LA had actually still been alive, and he actually had to undergo surgery. Unfortunately, LA lost way too much blood, and he ended up dying that night. Now, the loss of LA was obviously taken hard by a lot of his friends, you know, including the group 600, and everyone had just knew that LA was going to be the next big thing out of Chicago and putting his city on the map more than it already was. When he passed away, it was said that his entire friend group continue to fall apart. So the friend that we had recently spoke about earlier in this video, Rumble number 9, he and another member of the 600 group had actually committed a heinous crime, and that was for the murder of 29-year-old Javon Boyd. Now, Mr. Boyd had actually been a taxi driver when this had happened, and this incident had occurred on February 22nd, 2014. Now, if you want to see more details on that case, definitely I will have some links of some videos in the description box below, so you guys can go ahead and check it out and just hear the full story on that. But the two boys were sentenced to 38 and 39 years in prison. During the trial, there had been some rumors going around stating that someone in their camp had actually been snitching on them, and the video that I found really goes deep into all of that information. So if you guys want me to do a video on it, or if you want a link to the video that I watched, definitely let me know down in the description, down in the comments below, and I'll definitely do one. But there are definitely other videos that go into depth about Rondo, 600, and a lot of other Chicago legends on YouTube, you guys, and that's basically where I got most of this information from. But first, it was safe to say that the passing of LA had definitely been the beginning of the end for that friendship group, and this is all allegedly. Now, a year after LA was murdered, 3 young men had actually been arrested in connection of his murder. So Saki, Hardy Johnson, Michael Mays were just two of the young men named suspects, and also Miko Buchachan, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, I hope I am. But the third suspect, Miko, had been driving the getaway car. It was called a tail car. And I actually had to look up what a tail car meant, but it's just a car used to keep the killer safe, basically. So Johnson got 60 years, Mays got 24 years, and Buchachan got 45. LA's killers had ties to a gang called 051 Money Gang, and from what I gathered, the information that I gathered, this had been a set from another set called the Mickey Cobras, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly and the information is correctly. So if so, please let me know down in the comment section below. But this group was known to have beef with the 600 group. Saki, whose name in the streets was actually Little Mick, he was the one to have shot LA, and the other boys, Mays and the others, was accomplices, basically helpers. Now, police had actually got this information following the arrest of Michael Mays. He felt that he could basically just beat the case based off of what he would tell the police about what he knew on LA's murder, but it didn't work out the way he thought it would. So Mays was actually picked up on a gun charge, completely unrelated to the case, but Rockhead, which was his alias name, had ended up taking more time than he would have originally, so it was like he did that for no reason. So he named Little Mick, which was Sahid, as the shooter, and him and someone else as accomplices. In the end, it ended up being a he say kind of situation. They both were attempting to avoid that prison charge. Now, it's been said, allegedly, that LA's murder was in retaliation of the murder of a 14-year-old boy. This young man's name was Fathead, and he was a member of the gang 051 Money Gang. Now, Fathead had been murdered on June 22nd, 2012, and the events of that night went like this. As stated, he was walking with his cousin to the store, and a van pulled up behind them. A hooded man with a gun then ended up sneaking behind the boy, and they opened fire to Fathead, and he ended up passing away, sadly. The gang felt as if LA's crew had been responsible and that LA had been in the van at the time. And keep in mind, this is all alleged. Now, just returning back to the music, Separate Myself was the final mixtape that LA had been working on before he was killed, and it was actually released in 2013, and the mixtape consisted of his old and unreleased tapes, and LA even had some of his friends featured on there. And the last track that was recorded on his mixtape was called brothers. It is most definitely a shame that this young man was not able to reach his full potential and that his life had been cut so short and so senselessly. It just does not make any sense. He had a natural talent and was just known for being just a positive and, just vibrant person. He was even known as the class clown in school. And I don't want to sound so generic when I say this, but just a light to everyone that was around him. Leonard will definitely live through his family, his friends, his fans, and especially his music. I truly hope that the senseless killing between Black people can just cease to exist at this point. It's just ridiculous because we are losing so many doctors, teachers, talented artists, and the fact that this 10 plus years later, it's still happening is just disgusting. But before we go ahead and end off this video and go back to our lives, I just want to go ahead and say, if you do decide to interact in the comments, please keep it respectful and let's have healthy dialogues instead of negative ones. And if we do, disagree, let's just keep it positive. And as always, if you guys have any cases that you would like for me to review, you guys can go ahead and contact me through any of the social media links in the description box below, and I will definitely go ahead and cover them for you guys. So with that being said, this is the end of this video, and I hope everyone have a good day and stay safe.
Oh yeah, we take it sick. Steady running from the Jason sit. When we reach the top, we can stop doing this basic shit.